Yeah, same clothes, same day. I'm back. I rewatched my first video. I made myself cry, and if I made anybody else cry on that video, I'm so sorry. But what I realized in that video was I had promised to talk about some things that I didn't. I'm gonna move this camera up a hair. So if I want to welcome you to the shit show, I am your hostess, Tammy. We're talking about death of a spouse in this video. There's already 2 videos ahead of this one that's talking about the same thing. In the first video, I promised to talk to you about what the family did to him and me, and what the hospice did. I'm going to try and combine those 2 in this video. I watched that video. I told you I made myself cry. I'm really upset because you know what? The hard and the bad parts. I'm sorry, I can rearrange myself. My hips are bad. So, to start out with, I want to say I'm sorry for shaking the shit out of the camera. I should have not been lazy and just put it on that thing there. Yeah, the tripod. But I had it in my hand, okay? And yeah, I know better. So, sorry for the shaking. I hope I didn't make anybody too dizzy or sick. Next, I'm smoking. On every platform, people are smoking all kinds of shit. Drugs, vapes. I can smoke a cigarette. So I'm going to smoke one. Because when I rewatched that video and I seen the hurt from what his family did, I remembered the hurt that it caused my husband before he passed. Cheers. So go get a coffee, go get a booze, go get a shot, go get a joint, get a gummy. I don't care what you're taking. If you want to take something, go get it. Let's all be happy together. These are my advice. I don't do drugs. So, and iced coffee. Cheers. So, homemade, by the way. I'll give you the recipe. So anyway, I had told you about the day and that we had 10 doctors out telling Elliot that he had just days or hours to days to live. And they suggested that we take Elliot to a hospice. So the arrangements were made that day. Everything was set up. I was due to be home at 4 p.m. so they could deliver all the medical equipment that had to come here to my apartment for me to house my husband during his last days of life. So after we got that all taken care of, I told Elliot, since I had begged him for months to tell his mother, and he spoke to his mother, this 94, 95-year-old woman, every week. Now, she was very abusive to him as a child. There were just 2 children in that family, Elliot and his sister. Sister being the younger of the 2. But she was very abusive to him. And over the years, he forgave her. And they actually ended up having a very loving relationship to the point to where they spoke once a week, you guys. Either she called him or he called her. And she's hard as hearing as hell. And the only person that could talk to her without screaming was Elliot. He could talk just like I'm talking to you guys, and she would hear every word he said. But if I got on the phone or anybody else, we had to scream for Franny to hear us. So I call Franny. I go outside to have a cigarette, and I call his mother. And I'm crying. And I said, Franny, it's Tammy. Elliot's in the hospital, and I have really bad news. And of course, she starts freaking. Oh, my baby. And she's a New Yorker. Oh, you can imagine the accent, okay? Oh, my baby. Oh, my God. And her daughter, Elliot's sister, heard her and snatches the phone from her. Now, the whole time, she's barely hearing what I'm saying, and I'm having to scream. That's why I went outside in the first place, because I knew I was going to have to scream at little Miss Franny for her to hear me. So his sister gets on the phone, a condescending bitch that she is. Just saying. Yeah, I took my teeth out, by the way, so you know that I'm making this, like, off the top of my head, and I don't really care. Anyhow, so she tells me, after I tell her everything the doctor said, everything that's wrong with him at that moment, and that they've saved his life twice in a 12-hour period, she tells me I'm exaggerating. Excuse me? I said, what? Oh, Tammy, it's not that bad. I said, what is your problem, Marcia? And she said, well, my daughter's coming into town today, and I really, really want to see her. I said, it's not my problem if your daughter means more than seeing your brother before he passes. I said, but Franny, his mother, has a right to know the truth. I said, don't lie to her. Tell her the truth. And she says, well, text me everything that's wrong with him. I said, I will do that. And I did that. And I have the text message on my old phone. So I texted her. It took me like 30 minutes to type this out, because that's a lot of stuff wrong with this guy. Okay. Anyhow, I get back up to my husband's room, and I told him, I said, honey, this is what happened. I said, your mother I could barely talk to. Marcia snatched the phone. I said, she don't believe you're that sick. I said, you know, it is what it is. I'm sorry. You know, I said, we'll try and call your mother a little later so you can talk to her. And he said, I would like that, Tammy. I said, cool. But the phone rang, and it's his sister. And she goes, my mother is being brought to Arizona from Nevada, you guys, 95-year-old woman, by our cousin. Now, this particular cousin actually was in Nevada politics at one time. And I'm not going to say her name, but I'll tell you this, she's a condescending bitch. She always had been. She was when she was in politics, and as part of my husband's family, he said she was a condescending bitch. So the air that she put off when she was running for a seat in Nevada, I have to say, was exactly who she was. She was a bitch. So his sister says, well, my cousin is bringing my mother down today. I said, today? I said, perfect. You know, I said, you guys need to get here. The doctors gave him hours to days. And I said, tomorrow he's going in the hospice. This was a Saturday. So we get a phone call about 1, and it's his cousin. And we're on the road now. Now, I have born and raised Arizona, lived in Nevada from the age of 19 to 40-something, and I traveled that road often. And I know the fast way to get to Phoenix from Las Vegas. And the fastest I ever made it, and I was hauling ass, was 4.5 hours. And that's when I was a younger woman with no kids. And I had a fast car. Just put it that way. And I knew where the speed traps were. This woman made it in 4 hours. 4 hours. Now, good for her. But I told Elliot at 1, they just left. I know it's going to take them at least 4.5, 5 hours, because me and Elliot had traveled. When we got married, we went to Vegas. We went to Vegas to visit his mother on a couple occasions. When his one son wouldn't even come see us, his one son not only quit talking to him because he married me, but my husband refused to take a jab. And his son said, if you don't take it, don't call me again. Well, that's why my husband's oldest son didn't talk to my husband, because he tried to bully him into taking a shot. And my husband refused. And he told that kid. And now he's not a kid, he's like 42 years old. He told him, don't hold my grandchildren over my head just to get me to do what you want me to do. It's not working that way. Because if you guys notice how kids tend to try and run their parents' lives when we turn into seniors, that's something we could talk about. So anyway, that kid, his oldest, hadn't talked to his father in a good 4 or 5 years. He would say Happy Father's Day to his dad, but only after his dad sent him a Happy Father's Day. I don't even know that he said Happy Birthday. I think he did say Happy Birthday to his father this year on June 4th, before his father passed. But Last year he didn't, you know. Now the middle son always kept contact with his father. So anyway, that's the son that wouldn't let his mother live with him when she was dying of cancer, and that's why I had to take her into my house. I'm just giving you guys the briefest history of this bullshit family. I thought my family put the funk in dysfunctional. Really? No, not at all. So anyway, I told Elliot, well, the soonest they can be here, honey, is 5 o'clock. I'll leave at 4. I've been here for 2 full days. I'll leave at 4 so you can have some private time with your mother. Because in my mind and in my husband's mind, his cousin was bringing his mother so she could see her son for the last time. And I came home. And I had this odd feeling like, I wonder what Marcia told him. You know, I just had an odd feeling about it. Yeah. So anyhow, I get a call about 5 o'clock from my husband. And he said, honey, my mom wants to say hi. And I always would love to say hi to Franny. Franny used to tell me that I was the daughter she never had, that her own daughter and her first daughter-in-law wouldn't do anything for her. And I was always there pulling weeds and washing her cabinets and dusting for her and doing what I could. You know, I was taught to be that way, as most of you were. You know, you go to somebody's house and have dinner, you wash their dishes. You know, that's the way I was raised. But, you know, my mother-in-law at that time was in her 90s, in late 80s, 90s, and I didn't want her climbing up on chairs to dust cabinets or oil them or, you know, but she used to tell me I did things for her that her own daughter wouldn't do. Her own daughter wouldn't even talk to her. Her own daughter would walk into that house on the phone, be on the phone the half hour she was there and leave, and it used to break Franny's heart, but that's not the point. So Franny gets on the phone, and first thing Franny says to me is, oh, Tammy, his color is wonderful. And I said, you think so, Fran? And she's like, oh, yeah, he's not dying. I said, Franny, he's dying. No, Tammy, he's not dying. His color is too good. I said, Franny, put my husband on. And Ellie got on the phone. I said, what the fuck is she talking about? You're not dying. He goes, well, you know, honey, they think that I can get help and that, you know, there's something out there that'll save my life. I said, Elliot, weren't you there this morning with that meeting with all those doctors? And he said, yeah. I said, what'd they tell you? And I said, before you answer this question, put this on speaker because I want your mother and your cousin to hear our conversation. So he puts us on speaker. And and the cousin goes, well, hi, how are you? And I said, oh, you're the cousin he didn't like until last year because you were a pompous ass until your son killed himself and you decided to humble yourself and come back to the family. That's you, right? You guys, she shut up immediately. And Elliot's like, Tammy, I said, no. I said, no. I said, they're there for a reason, and now I know that reason, and it's not for your mother to say goodbye to her son. I said, I don't know what you guys told him. I said, Elliot, what did your doctor tell you this morning? And he said, that I'm dying. I said, how long did your doctors, honey, tell you had to live? And he said, hours to days. I said, would you please look at those 2 women in your room and tell them everything that is wrong with you? And he goes, well, didn't you text that to Marcia this morning? I said, I did. And he said to his cousin, didn't Marcia tell you everything Tammy texted her? And his cousin goes, she did. And Elliot says, that's what's wrong with me. She didn't lie to anybody. And so I said, Elliot, I'm going to tell you what. Don't make me come back down there. I said, you 2 women don't make me come back down there. I said, because I will. I said, Elliot, when they leave, call me. And I hung up. You guys, within 5 minutes, my husband calls back. And he said, Tammy. And I said, are they still there? I said, because if they are, I have nothing to say. He goes, no, I sent them away. I said, Elliot, They came there for the main purpose. I said, Marcia told me I was lying about everything that was wrong with you. She told me that I was lying, that you weren't passing, that your time here wasn't limited. I said, she sent your mother there, still believing, honey, and conning you into believing that you're not dying. I said, Elliot, you're dying, honey. Nobody can fix it. Nobody can stop it. They told us that this morning. I said, I know it hurts. And he said, I know. He said, I sent them away, honey. I said, I'm glad you did. I said, because they were only there to cause chaos. I said, I'll be down in the morning. I'll be there at 6 a.m. I said, and we'll have time together. I said, because when the doctor comes back around, since you seem to think, and they seem to think, that there's something that can be done for you, honey, we're going to ask him together, okay? And he goes, would you do that? I said, honey, I'll do anything you want me to do right now except for lie to you. I said, I'm not lying to you. You're dying now. You've been dying, and you know that. I said, I'll see you in the morning. I love you. The next morning, I get there at 6 a.m. Needless to say, I was up at 3, but I get there at 6, and I walk in. I'm crying, and the nurse comes up, and she said, he had a bad night. And I said, oh. You know, I said, he's going in the hospice today. And I said, you guys, thank you for all you've done for him. I said, I have an issue, though. Excuse me. I said his mother and his cousin came in here last night, and they told him that he wasn't dying. And they told him that the doctors were lying to him and that something could be done to save his life. She goes, there's nothing that can save his life. I said, I know that, and you know that. I said, but he believes, from our conversation last night, that something else can be done. And she goes, how about if I go in there with you right now? I said, would you really? She goes, oh, absolutely. She goes, I'm upset about that myself. She goes, I was with you guys yesterday. I said, I know. So she went in there with me. I said good morning to my husband. He was happy to see me. And I said, Elliot, do you remember this nurse? And he goes, I do. I said, she was here yesterday when all those doctors were outside your room with everything that's going on in your body, and who gave us the diagnosis. And I said, what did your mother and your sister, your cousin talk to you about yesterday? He said, they told me I wasn't dying and that there was something that could be done for me. And that sweet little nurse said, sir, she said, Elliot, there's nothing in this world that can help you. You absolutely have no intestines. You couldn't even wear a colostomy bag. Your liver is gone. Your lungs are on the way out. And right now, if we took you off that medicine that's keeping your blood pressure high enough to keep you alive, you wouldn't be here more than an hour. She says, you are dying. What the doctors told you yesterday morning is factual. My husband started crying. And he started saying, I'm scared. And of course, I started crying. The nurse started crying. She had to leave the room. So I'm hugging him. And I'm telling him, I know you're scared, honey. I'd be scared too. I'm scared for my last times and moments in this world. I'm scared of that last breath, that last thought. You know, I'm afraid of that too, is what I told him. I said, but I would never lie to you. I would never lie to your mother. I said, I don't care about your sister or that cousin. I said, but I would never lie to your mother, and I'd never lie to you. And he said, I don't want to see him. I said, they're coming back here today? And he said, yes. And I said, let me get the nurse. I got the nurse, I brought her in, and I said, he wants to tell you something. And he says, when my mother comes, or if she calls, you tell her I do not want to see her or my cousin. Because what they did to me last night isn't humane. He goes, they really had me believing that I wasn't dying and that my wife was lying. And the nurse said, okay. And I said, and make sure they know it's his decision and not me. Because They thought I was making all these decisions. What they didn't realize was anything Elliot wanted, I made sure happened. And I told him that. I don't care how ridiculous it is. I don't care how outlandish it is. I will do whatever I can to make sure you get what you want. And I meant it. Up until the point where they had even told my husband that if he came to my house for hospice, I would see to it that all the things that I was saying about his body would cause his death. Yep. No, I can't cry on that one. I want to rip some face off on that one. My husband said, I want to go into the hospice. You guys, it broke my heart. I cried for hours begging him, honey, please. If you come to my house, I can feed you. They won't feed you. They won't give you water. And you guys, the odd thing is my husband wasn't in pain. They would ask him every time they walk in, which pain level? He'd say, I don't have any pain. My husband, when they transferred him out of that hospital, my husband had no pain. He had upset stomach. And all he asked for was something to calm his stomach. And they would slap him with morphine at the hospice instead of giving him stomach medicine like they were at the hospital. They were jacking him up with morphine for an upset stomach. But I cried that whole day until 3 o'clock. I begged him, please, please, I'm begging you. Don't go into the hospice, honey. And he goes, no, I'm going, Tammy. You promised that whatever I wanted you would give me. And I said, I'm afraid you'll die alone and I won't be there. Please don't go. And he said, I've made up my mind. And I said, I will support you and I will try as hard as I can to be there when you take your last breath, but I can't promise, honey. Sorry. This rips my heart out. That his family would tell him that I was out to make sure he died because I had exaggerated his test results. My husband went into hospice and I got to see him that next day. They transferred him. I left that hospital that day at about 3. They transferred him to hospice at 4. I was in hospice the next morning to see him. And he was telling me he was sick to his stomach that morning. And so I went out and told the nurse, I said, he needs something for an upset stomach. And she gave me an alcohol swab. And I said, what the hell is this for? And she said, oh, that'll take his nausea away. I said, well, I've never heard anything like that. Well, I'll try it. And I went back in and no, it didn't work. So I went back out. I said, that's ridiculous. I said, all it's doing is popping his eyes wide open every time I stick it under his nose. I said, he just wants a little shot, like he was getting in the hospital to calm his stomach. And she said, well, the other nurse is coming on right now. I'll send her in. This big blonde nurse comes in. Wide blonde nurse. And I tell her, my husband's stomach is upset. And she said to him, Elliot, what's going on? And he said, my stomach is upset. He said, could I have some medicine to calm my stomach? And she goes, oh, absolutely. I said, see, honey, all you had to do is ask. You guys, when she put that medicine in his arm, she looked in his face and watched his eyes slam shut, and they did not open again. I'd never seen my husband with his eyes opened again. Because I didn't see him for the next 2 days because his sons were there. And out of respect for his relationship with his children, I stepped away, but he kept asking them, where's Tammy? Why isn't Tammy here? I want my Tammy. Call my Tammy. And so I would talk to him on the phone during those days. But the fact is, she shot him with so much morphine for an upset stomach that it knocked him out. That's what I have against hospice. My husband the day before wasn't even in pain. They hadn't had to give him any painkillers in the hospital. This is a man who has no intestines. He's got, his body's shut down. His kidneys have shut down. He's got sepsis. And the man has no pain. None. None, you guys. He had no pain Sunday before they sent him to hospice. What his family, and you know, I didn't see him from Sunday night. I called. So of course the minute that they told me they were transferring him, I called down immediately and said, my name is Tammy, I am his wife, I will be down in the morning. Well, I guess Marcia had called before I got there, his sister. And I don't know what the hell she told these people, but the next time I spoke to the lady who was so kind to me, that first phone call was a literal bitch. Are you even married to him? Is what she said to me. I said, I'll tell you what, sweetheart. I'll bring down my damn marriage certificate. And I said, then you can give me an apology. And my husband for insinuating that not only am I lying, but that he is lying. And I took my marriage certificate and I confronted her that day. That was the big blonde bitch who gave him that shot of morphine for an upset stomach. That's the female. And so I looked at her, I said, why'd you knock him out? And she goes, well, that's all we give for upset stomach around here. I said, oh, morphine, eh? To a man who's not in pain but has an upset stomach. And she got kind of rude with me. And I said, aren't you the lady who said, am I even married to him? And she goes, yeah, I was that lady with the conversation. I said, let me show you something. And I opened my backpack and I ripped out my marriage certificate and I shoved it in her face. I said, I am married to him. Get it straight. And I put it back in my backpack. And I said, anybody else in here doubt that, just let me know. I said, because I'll keep it in my backpack as long as I have to. I said, now if you'll excuse me, even though you knocked my husband out and my visit is now cut short, I would like to sit in here with him without you in the room. And she left. So I sat with him for a couple hours. I washed his face, and he was so out of it, you guys. He was so knocked. You know what? And when the look she gave when she slammed that morphine in his arm, she smiled as his eyes were slamming shut. The good thing is, before my husband was knocked out of his mind with morphine, he said, honey, take my phone home. I said, okay. He said, take my wallet. I said, where are they? And he said, the phone's on that table and the wallet's in the drawer. I said, okay, honey, I'll get them. And I got them. Don't you know that woman called me that afternoon and said, did you take your husband's phone? And I said, first of all, what's it to you? And second of all, he asked me to. And third of all, it's in my fucking name. I said, you have an issue with me taking my property? Oh, no, we were just afraid it had gotten stolen. I said, no, you weren't. No, you weren't. I said, it's none of your business where it went. I got it. I said, and if you'd let him wake up, he would tell you so. Now, this is the point that upsets me, is the whole day that I was trying to visit with my husband, she kept him so high on morphine that he never woke up again. But the minute the boys come in on Tuesday morning, the very next morning, he had one shot of morphine that whole fucking day, to the point to where the son called me and said, Tammy, Dad is in pain. Can't you call these people and tell them to put him back on the schedule and the regiment that he was on when we came here? Because he's hurting. And so I called the doctor and I said, my husband's son say that my husband is in pain and they would like him put back on the schedule that he was on when I was there yesterday. And I said, and I too do not want him in pain, and I want him back on that schedule. And she goes, he's not on no schedule. I said, how is it you guys kept him knocked out all day yesterday? Well, he asked for it. I said, he didn't ask for it in the morning. He asked for something for his stomach. He didn't ask for you guys to knock him out. So, when I tell you that do not go to Hospice of the Valley, I'm not kidding. And I dare them. I absolutely dare them to come near me and get me for slander. Because I have proof for everything that I'm saying here. That is the worst hospice I've ever seen in my life. They should be sued. And I'm considering it. They took away my rights as a wife. They took my grieving and doubled that pain. They made his sons suffer watching him in pain because they wouldn't give him anything because they thought he wanted to be wide awake to see his sons. When the whole time that he was awake, all he asked for was me. And his son told me that. His son, his youngest son, by his first wife, said to me, Tammy, he loved you unbelievably deeply with all of his heart. I said, I know, honey. I know. So, I promise to tell you what the family did to me and what the hospice did to me. I told you already that the day that I signed the papers to have my husband's body shipped to New York, that lady said she didn't feel comfortable with that decision. And I told her, I don't give a fuck what you're comfortable with. Now you guys know why I had such an attitude that day. And I don't put it past that place to have sent the death certificates to the wrong fucking address because they're the ones who sent it out. So when I say that they don't deserve to be called in hospice, they don't deserve to be paid by Social Security or whoever they're paid by. My husband's insurance company. All they do, they starve them, they don't get water, they don't get food, and they are packed full of morphine. My husband didn't get one drink while he was there except for the drink I gave him on Monday morning when I got there. Because he told me, I haven't drank since I got here. I'm so thirsty. So I wet his lips and I gave him a drink. And at the time there were these little straw things where they usually make you dip it in mouthwash and wipe their lips so they're not dry. He's still drinking and eating when I seen him last. Why you got those straws out? You know, that's what I told her. So when I got there on Monday morning, he told me, I am so thirsty. They haven't given me anything to drink, and I didn't get no dinner. I said, well, I'll get you some applesauce, and here's a drink of water. And drink slow, honey. Sips, little sips. Well, I think the cancer had started coming up in his stomach because you guys, that water made him nauseous. And that was all we asked for, was a pill to take away the nausea. And if I had had my own stomach pills on me, I'd have gave him one of those at that point. Because at no point did we believe, asking for nothing more than a shot to settle his stomach, they would slam him with morphine and knock him out for the rest of the day. And they did. I called back. I came home 2 hours after being there. I called back at 1, he was still out. I called back at 3, he was still out. I called back at 5, he was still back. He was still out. 8 o'clock, he was still out. I went to bed at 11, he was still out. And when I called at 4 a.m. to see how he did through the night, he was still out. Okay? So when I say die at home, because they will send a nurse in 2 days a week, they will send a caretaker 3 days a week. That means somebody comes in, they cook for you, they clean for you, they wash you, whatever you need done, and then the medical people come in and they make sure you've got enough medicines on hand for you to take yourself. Die in your own house. Don't die in these buildings, you guys. They're nothing but a death factory. For reals. And you know what? Company would have been much more comfortable in my house than sitting around in a hospital when all they could do was go in and out of a room and watch their father sleep or watch their father be in pain. He could have played his guitar at my house. So, do yourself a favor. make the paperwork happen, because I have just signed mine. I just rewrote my living will, where I will not be put into a hospice facility. I will die within my own home, in the comfort of my own home, in my own damn bed. And if I want to drink ice cold water or coffee, damn well I'll have it. And I won't have nobody jacking me up with morphine. Cheers. So, get those living wills filled out, you guys. If you don't believe in being cremated, make sure you put it in there. If you don't believe in anything, if you want anything, if you don't want to be resuscitated, put it in there. Hold on a minute. I gotta get more clean. If you don't want to be cremated, put it in that living will. If you don't want morphine through hospice, they have other drugs. They have other drugs they can give you. It doesn't have to be a morphine death. You know, I mean, we all dream of dying in our sleep, right? I guess that's the morphine dream. I don't know. I don't want to die from morphine overdose. I don't think it's a pretty death. So, fill out your living wills, you guys. Put in there everything. Absolutely everything. To the point that even if you have a spouse, that way, when that living will is turned over, because it goes into a file, I don't know if you know this, but every hospital in your state has access to your doctor's files on you. That living will is filed at your doctor's office, and you have a copy in your possession. They just pull up your name and they see that you have a living will. I had to change mine. Absolutely. So change your living will. Make out a living will. Get that life insurance, you guys. And whatever you do, the loved one that's passing, you know, it broke my heart that my husband didn't want to come to my house, and I cried all day. Right there in front of him, didn't care. It broke my heart. But the fact is, that was his wishes. And I told him the minute we found out that he was dying, that he had only hours to days to live, that whatever he wanted, I would do my best to fulfill, no matter how bad it hurt me. And I said it just like that. And it did hurt, but I did it. So make your wishes known. Because if you don't, people in hospice, hospitals, doctors, even loved ones are going to do what they want to do and not what you want. If it was up to his mother and to his cousin and his sister, I don't know what they would have done with him. There was just nothing that could be done. How they figured. And poor Franny. When we had his service, they had to do it over a conference call because, again, it was in Rhode Island. No, not Rhode Island. It was in New York, anyway. Yeah, I can't think of the city right now. Everybody got to speak. Me, his wife, I got to say a few words about my husband. It went to his children and even to his mother. And his mother, I heard her barely say he loved his mother. And you guys, she came back to that hospital. Even after the phone call and the nurse told his mother and his cousin, don't come here, he doesn't want to see you. They showed up. And she came in that room one more time and said, your mother's outside. And he said, I told you I did not want to see her. And at that point I said, El, you sure you don't want to see just your mother? He said, Tammy, I said I didn't want to see her. And so at that point, the nurse got pissed off and she said, well, somebody make up. I said, he made up his mind. I was trying to talk him into seeing her. Don't yell at me, sweetheart. You know, I'm not in the mood and I'm not your fucking walking mat. So he wouldn't even see his mother then. So she had to live with that because of the selfishness of Elliot's sister. And you know what? The sad part is The sister will never care. She's never cared. Ever. Ever. I mean, I could go into this family and tell you that Franny doesn't see her Social Security checks. The daughter gets them. That one thing that the daughter didn't embezzle from her mother and talk her into, out of all that estate, and you know, most of those people have money, and that family had money. But that mother bought several houses for that daughter, that daughter lost. There was one house left. One house. And she got that too. So, guys, death tears people apart, and you have to realize that. You have to realize there's greed. There's people thinking about just themselves. There's narcissists who have families that are narcissists that no wonder they turned out that way. Because I told you in the beginning of this film that I thought my family put the funk in dysfunctional. No. No. Not even. Not compared to that family. Am I glad that I'm not a part of that family? I never have been. I didn't take my husband's last name. I wouldn't have took my husband's last name. I didn't give our son his last name. I didn't want my son to have that legacy. I didn't want that legacy upon me. I didn't marry him for love. I married him as an arrangement. Because I'll tell you guys, 3 months before we got married, Elliot had a Cologuard test taken. And I know that as seniors, you all know what a Cologuard test is. We both had it. We had the same doctor. He had us both do it at the same time. Mine come back normal, 100% normal, no irregular cells. Elliot's came back with 67% of irregular cells, and that was in 2019, before we got married. So we got married in 2020. So he knew at that time that he pretty much had colon cancer. He wouldn't do another test. Our doctor, we have a wonderful doctor, he's still my doctor. Our doctor said, do another test, let's make sure it's not a false positive. You know, those tests could come back, because Elliot's like, I feel fine, there's nothing wrong with me. That doctor begged him to do another test. He refused. That doctor said, let's just do a colonoscopy. We'll find out the truth. And Elliot refused. And I have to tell you, he knew something was up, because it was 3 months after that he approached me about marriage. And I agreed. Because I knew then too that he more likely had colon cancer. And when the doctors in the hospital found out that that was like, what, 5-6 years ago, that he has 67%, especially the oncologist, when he heard that, he went, oh yeah, that's about right. When he heard that 6 years ago, Elliot's test came back 67% irregular cells from a Cologuard, the oncologist was like, oh yeah, that was it. That was it then, you know. So take care of yourselves, you guys. Get those tests done. Take care of yourselves. And I did watch my video again. Broke my heart. I cried through it again. But I did promise you guys some information. And I've covered both. I promised you I would tell you what his family did to me and to Elliot. Because you know what? I knew he was dying. But for them to convince a dying man that he's not dying and there's something that can be done for him, that was nothing but cruelty. That was cruel. And if I ever see any of those people, I'm going to tell them, cruelty. You're cruel humans. Get away from me. That was cruel. It didn't bother me. Pissed me off. You know, I've been called a liar before. Who gives a shit? You know, I don't care what they think about me. So sweat off my ass. I can take their opinion and scrape it off my ass as far as I'm concerned. You know, I don't care, but what they did to him on that day broke my heart. And those people are the cruelest people I've ever met in my life. And I will never have anything to do with them again. I don't care how much his mother suffers. She partook in something. You know what? She was mentally and physically abusive to Elliot his whole life. as a child, as a young adult, as an old adult. But for her to walk in his last days of life and lie to him to his face and tell him he's not dying, that something can be done for him, was one of the worst things that old woman could have done. Period. That's just how I feel about it. Anyway, I'm going to get off here now. So you see me for the first time without my false teeth in. Anyhow, I don't care. I had to get this out. You guys have a great day. And you know what? I am working on forgiving them. Because they're all I got to forgive. Because Elliot has been forgiven. And will always be forgiven in my heart. For everything that he did. And I pray that he forgave me. And I know he did. You guys have a great day. Remember to love yourself. Be kind to others. And don't lie to anybody. Especially when it comes to things like life. Peace out.